Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, January 26th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Germany's foreign minister says that they are fighting a war against Russia. So, German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock said Tuesday that Germany and its allies are fighting a war against Russia in rare, candid remarks about the Western role in the conflict in Ukraine. So, she made these comments on Tuesday at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, France. And she said this while discussing the criticism that her government has faced for its hesitancy to send tanks. Although that impasse has been broken, as Berlin confirmed on Wednesday that it will send its own Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. And I'll get much more into that on the next story. But I'm just going to read this quote. And I was a little late with this. I saw Michael Tracy put this video on Twitter. Again, this happened Tuesday. She said, quote, "Therefore, I've said already in the last days, yes, we have to do more to defend Ukraine. Yes, we have to do more also on tanks. But the most important and crucial part is that what we do together is that we do it together and that we do not do the blame game in Europe, because we are fighting a war against Russia, not against each other," end quote. So there you have it. As other people put it, she said the quiet part out loud there. And her remarks, align with Russia's view. We've heard a lot from Russian officials saying that they are not just fighting Ukrainian forces inside Ukraine. They say they're also fighting against the U.S. and NATO. And Ukraine's defense minister, Oleksiy Reznikov, he made similar comments recently, saying that Ukraine is shedding blood for a NATO mission. He also said Ukraine is a de facto NATO member. And I think at this point, it's hard to argue against that. And the idea that NATO is directly involved, this is a point that I make a lot, but it's worth making. The idea that NATO is directly involved in the war, it signals that, it means really that Russia, if they choose to take this step, have the pretext to launch an attack on a NATO country in retaliation. Right now, there's no sign that Russia is plotting to do something like that. But the Western powers continue to risk dangerous escalations as they keep ramping up military support for Ukraine. And as the U.S. is also discussing helping Ukraine attack Crimea, that's a huge risk of escalation there. So we're just going to keep moving in this direction. And that's what this next article is about. The next one here, President Biden announces that the U.S. will send 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. So it's official. Biden came out, gave an address on Wednesday, specifically to say that the U.S. is going to be sending these tanks. And this pledge came just days after Pentagon officials were saying that it didn't make sense to send the Abrams because they're too difficult to maintain. But the U.S. decided to send them anyway as part of a deal to persuade Germany to provide its own Leopard 2 tanks. That's really what this is about. And the German government confirmed on Wednesday that it would send 14 of their Leopard 2 tanks and that they would allow the export of the German-made tank from other countries. So Poland has already said it's ready to send Leopard 2s, also 14. And according to German media reports, Spain, Finland, and the Netherlands will do so as well. So Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, he previously resisted sending these tanks, citing his desire to prevent a clash between Russia and NATO. But the U.S. and other NATO countries are not concerned about this risk of escalation, and they really put the pressure on Scholz's government, resulting in him agreeing to provide the Leopard 2 if the U.S. sends the Abrams. Those were her conditions. Those were his conditions, and the U.S. obliged. On top of sending the Abrams, the U.S. will provide Ukraine with training, spare parts, and other related equipment. The U.S. recently launched new training programs for Ukrainian soldiers in Germany and at a military base in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, they're being trained how to use the Patriot missile defense systems. So it means they could either train Ukrainians in the U.S. or somewhere in Europe. Most likely Germany, I would guess, if they were going to do it in Europe. Administration officials told Politico that the Abrams tanks are being provided through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. That's meaning that the U.S. is buying these tanks for Ukraine. And it means they could take, the officials say it could take months, but I think it could take years for them to be delivered because they're being manufactured. So it could take a while. They're not going to get on the battlefield for a very long time. But the Leopards are different because they're going to come straight from Germany's military stockpiles and straight from the other countries' stockpiles. It means they have them ready to go to ship over there. But how many that they're going to get, it's tough to say at this point. Ukraine was saying that they want 300, modern battle tanks at least. And, a few countries sending about 14 isn't going to add up to that. So we'll see. Another official said that the U.S., so another administration official said that the U.S. had to provide the tanks through this way, by purchasing them because it doesn't have enough in its own stockpiles. And the U.S. has been depleting its own military stockpiles, specifically of artillery ammunition, by shipping over 1 million shells to Ukraine. And as a result, as I went over yesterday, the Pentagon is working to increase shell production by 500%. Just an example of how much money there is to be made off of this policy. All right, so the next one here, more about the tanks. The Kremlin says that the U.S. Abrams tanks will burn in Ukraine. So this is Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, responding to President Biden's pledge to send 31 M1 Abrams. He said, quote, "I am certain that many experts understand the absurdity of this idea. The plan is disastrous in terms of technology. But above all, it overestimates the potential it will add to the Ukrainian army. These tanks burn just like all the others," end quote. So again, Biden made this announcement right after Pentagon officials said it would be too hard to send these tanks. Well, the New York Times reported on Wednesday night that the decision to send the tanks was more of a political calculation to get Germany to send the Leopards. And it doesn't really matter that logistically it's going to be a headache for U.S. military, as this New York Times report put it. So this report said they described the decision as a triumph of political calculation over logistical concerns. The report said that the decision made no sense. This is how the New York Times put it. David Sanger and a few other co-authors said that the decision made no sense to the Pentagon to go through the logistical headaches of sending the country's most advanced tanks to Ukraine when there were very capable German Leopard tanks nearby that could get to Ukraine faster and operate more efficiently. So it's just interesting that really, you should go check out this New York Times article, because it's basically just saying, Biden just did this to get Germany to do it. It's kind of, they're going to be tough, these tanks, for Ukraine to operate, but let's send 31 of them over there. Anyway, and then Russia also responded to Germany's decision. The Russian embassy in Germany put out a pretty scathing statement saying that this move will lead to permanent escalation. Russia's ambassador in Germany said, quote, "This extremely dangerous decision takes the conflict to a new level of confrontation and contradicts the statements of German politicians about the unwillingness of the Federal Republic of Germany to be drawn into it. It destroys the remnants of mutual trust, causes irreparable damage to the already deplorable state of Russian-German relations, and casts doubt on the possibility of their normalization in the foreseeable future," end quote. He also mentioned, the historical context, the fact that the last time German tanks, headed east, across Ukraine was during World War II when the Nazis invaded. And Schultz, sorry, I said that already. So American and European officials told the New York Times that 3 months ago it would have been inconceivable that Schultz and Biden would be sending such heavy arms to Ukraine. Shows how quick this is all escalating. The report acknowledged that the step brings the U.S. and its NATO allies closer to a direct conflict with Russia. So that's the New York Times characterization of it. That's not mine. It's very clear that by escalating this aid, it's making a direct clash between the U.S. and NATO and Russia more likely. And we know what that means. That would mean World War III. That would likely mean nuclear war very quickly. So that's the game, the dangerous game that they're playing with all this escalation. And I bet, and it looks like, more escalations are coming, because this next article here, Lockheed Martin says that they're ready to go with F-16s for Ukraine. So Lockheed Martin has said that it's ready to meet demands for F-16 fighter jets if the U.S. and its allies choose to ship them to Ukraine. So far, the U.S. and its allies have been hesitant to send fighter jets due to concerns that they could be used to target Russian territory. But of course, they're caring less and less about escalation. Frank St. John, who is the chief operating officer of Lockheed, he told Financial Times that there have been a lot of conversations about third-party transfer of F-16s. And that means countries in Europe that have F-16s that already bought them would ship them to Ukraine. And then he's basically saying that Lockheed is ready to, backfill those F-16s. They're ready to go here. He said that, Lockheed Martin was not involved in these conversations directly, which I don't know. I bet they're involved in some way. He said that that Lockheed Martin was, quote, going to be ramping up production on F-16s in Greenville, South Carolina, to get to the place where we will be able to backfill pretty capably any countries that choose to do third-party transfers to help with the current conflict, end quote. So the Netherlands last week, they expressed an openness to sending its F-16s with the Dutch foreign minister saying that they would look at any request with an open mind. Another option could be for former Warsaw Pact countries that are now NATO members to send their older Soviet-made MiG fighter jets to Ukraine and replace them with F-16s or other modern Western-made aircraft. So if you remember earlier in the war, Poland was ready to do that, send their MiGs, but they didn't want to do it themselves. They told the U.S., we'll send them to Germany, and then you send them to Ukraine. And then the Pentagon decided not to over escalation concerns. And that was right at the beginning of the war. So what was interesting, a Ukrainian Air Force spokesman claimed on Tuesday that the U.S. and Ukraine have already decided what aircraft Washington will provide Kiev. But the spokesman did not specify which aircraft. So it was interesting, to see him say that. I haven't seen any sign from the American side or any reports that they've decided to arm Ukraine with a fighter jet. But here we have the Ukrainian Air Force saying that a deal's about to happen. And while he didn't specify which plane, Ukraine has really been lobbying for the U.S. to provide F-15 and F-16 fighter jets, and they would involve months of training for Ukrainian forces, but we've already seen that hasn't stopped the U.S. The U.S. has already pledged to send weapon systems that require extensive training, including the Patriot missile defense systems and the M1 Abrams tanks. And Lockheed Martin, they have benefited greatly from the war in Ukraine, as many of its weapon systems are now in high demand, including the HIMARS rocket systems and the Javelin anti-tank missiles. President Biden showed his appreciation for the arms maker last May when he visited a Lockheed Martin plant producing Javelins. And during a little speech he gave there, he said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." So, they're standing to make a lot of money, Lockheed Martin. And this next one demonstrates that as well. U.S. arms sales soared in 2022 due to Ukraine war. So U.S. arms sales to foreign governments boomed in 2022 as defense firms cashed in on the war in Ukraine. According to State Department numbers, sales rose to $205.6 billion in the 2022 fiscal year. So this is the fiscal year, which I think ends September 30th for the U.S. government. The sales are divided into two categories: direct military sales between a U.S. company and a foreign government, and sales that are overseen by the U.S. government, that are facilitated by the U.S. government, known as foreign military sales. That's what the State Department calls them. So the State Department said that the U.S. government approved $51.9 billion in potential arms sales in 2022, up from $34.8 billion the previous year. And then when it comes to the direct sales between contractors and governments, that rose to $153.7 billion compared with $103 billion in 2021. So almost 50% increase there. And one of the primary drivers of this increase is that the U.S.'s European allies, a lot of them started increasing military spending in response to Russia's invasion, and they're looking for new equipment. And they're starting to buy a lot of new equipment. And the U.S. has been encouraging countries in Eastern Europe to get rid of their older Russian-made equipment by sending it to Ukraine and replacing it with new U.S.-made arms. So it's just so many different ways that they're making money, that Lloyd Austin's pals at Raytheon are making money off of this war. One of the major deals from last year was Germany's decision to purchase Lockheed Martin-made F-35 fighter jets worth about $8.4 billion. And these F-35s are meant to replace Germany's fleet of Tornado bombers, that they keep them around because they can carry U.S. nuclear warheads that are kept in Germany. So this fleet of F-35s going to replace the Tornadoes so they can carry nuclear warheads. And, you know, Schultz's government, when it first formed, there were members of the coalition that wanted to get rid of the U.S. nukes, but that went away. They also had this policy, this great policy. They said they're not going to send weapons to a war zone. Well, that changed. That's all changed very quickly over the past almost year. So the U.S. is also encouraging countries in the Asia Pacific to beef up their militaries as part of a buildup aimed at China. One major sale to the region was to Indonesia. Indonesia themselves, they're reluctant to get in the middle between U.S. and China, but they are looking to beef up their military, and they purchased 36 Boeing-made F-15 fighter jets in a deal worth $13.9 billion. That's a big deal. All right, I just want to take this moment to mention again, it's our fundraiser at antiwar.com. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd fame put up $20,000. We need to secure that in matching funds. And the good news is the money has been rolling in very well this week. We're just under 60,000. We want to get up to 80,000. And, you know, we're trying to wrap it up this week. Everybody's been working hard on making calls on the phones. So it's coming along pretty quickly. Usually, you know, fundraisers last longer than this, but we're having a lot of success, which is good because the last one we really struggled. But please help us, you know, wrap this up. We need to match these funds so we can get them all from Roger Waters. So you go to antiwar.com/donate. You know, share it around. Tell your friends about us. That's another big way you could really help. And if you can't support us financially, you know, just spread the word about antiwar.com. Share this show and do all the stuff like that. But antiwar.com/donate, help us wrap it up. All right, the next article here, Ukraine concedes defeat in Donetsk town of Soledar. So Ukraine on Wednesday conceded that it withdrew from the small mining town of Soledar in the Donetsk Oblast almost 2 weeks after Russian forces said they took control of the area. So Soledar is just a few miles northeast of Bakhmut, where Russian and Ukrainian forces have been locked in heavy battles for months. Sergei Sherevaty, he is a Ukrainian military spokesman. He told AFP that Ukrainian forces left Soledar after weeks of heavy fighting, focused on the town, but did not say when the withdrawal happened. The Russian Defense Ministry, they said that they took control of the town on January 12th. 2 days earlier, Yevgeny Prigozhin, he's the head of the Russian mercenary outfit, the Wagner Group. He said his fighters captured the town, so that was on January 10th. But he did say that fighting was still ongoing. There was still some fighting in the town. So I put in a map. If you're watching on the video here, you could see Bakhmut and really where there's been all this heavy fighting around Soledar. And I have to fix this actually so we could zoom in. But if you're watching, Soledar's up here and Bakhmut's down here, and there's still been a lot of heavy fighting. Some of Ukraine's Western backers have been expressing concern about the heavy casualties Ukrainian forces have been taking in the battle around Bakhmut. Der Spiegel reported that Germany's Federal Intelligence Service was alarmed by the high casualty rate and said Ukrainian forces were losing a three-digit number of soldiers every day. A U.S. official told Reuters that the view in Washington is that Ukraine has spent considerable resources defending Bakhmut, and that it's likely, they believe, this is the opinion of people in Washington, that Russian forces are going to capture the city. And they're advising them not to launch a counteroffensive at this time in the area. All right, so the next one here, more U.S. airstrikes in Somalia. U.S. Africa Command said in a press release that it launched an airstrike in Somalia on January 23rd against al-Shabaab in support of the Mogadishu-based government. The press release said that the strike took place near a remote town about 246 miles northeast of Mogadishu. So that puts it in central Somalia, where there's been a lot of heavy fighting on the ground between al-Shabaab and the government. AFRICOM claimed in its assessment that it killed 2 al-Shabaab fighters, and they claimed that no civilians were killed or injured due to the remote location of the operation. That's their new line. It doesn't even sound like they really looked into it very much. And I always have to point out, it's incredibly important to point out that the Pentagon is notorious for undercounting or simply just lying about civilian casualties, especially in Somalia, where operations are shrouded in secrecy. The strike was the second known U.S. airstrike in Somalia in just a matter of days. The last one was reported on January 20th, and AFRICOM claimed that killed 30 al-Shabaab fighters. So that's a lot of people that they're saying they killed. The U.S. has escalated its airstrikes in Somalia since President Biden ordered the deployment of up to 500 troops to the country last May. As a result, U.S. airstrikes in the country rose by 30%. Despite the escalation, the U.S. war in Somalia receives very little media coverage. And adding to the media blackout, the U.S.-backed government in Somalia also has strict rules for the media. Somali journalists say that the government recently enacted a new rule that requires them to submit content for approval. So that, I doubt that they would want any information about U.S. airstrikes killing civilians, getting out there if they're censoring journalists like that. So again, just such an underreported war. And I basically just have to rely on these press releases from AFRICOM to write these articles, because the only outlets that pick these up usually are like Military Times or places that basically just are, their news articles are like press releases for the Pentagon. And so are a lot of mainstream media outlets in the U.S. So, all right, the next article here, this is from Jason Ditz. The media faults Pompeo for defending Saudi assassination of journalist. So, released this week as part of an effort to kickstart his political campaign, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo caused considerable controversy in addressing and ultimately dismissing Saudi Arabia's 2018 assassination and dismemberment of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So this was in Pompeo's memoir. Again, it does look like he's gearing up for a presidential run. I don't think he's going to do very well. He's definitely not very likable. And I don't know. But the Trump administration did little in response to the killing, and Pompeo's State Department led efforts to argue that Saudi Prince Mohammed bin Salman likely orchestrated the matter, but still ought not be held accountable. The direction of this argument in the new book was both vilifying Khashoggi and downplaying his value as a reporter. Pompeo claimed Khashoggi was an activist with ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and claimed that he mourned Osama bin Laden. Khashoggi's wife dismissed these claims, as did media outlets he was connected with. Pompeo argued that Khashoggi was only a journalist in as far as his writings were published, but also claiming that he and other officials had things published, but did other things on top of that. So he was saying Khashoggi is a journalist as much as he is, because his stuff gets published sometimes. So, of course, Pompeo got a lot of criticism for this. And, what's interesting is that Pompeo, when he was the head of the CIA in 2017, and WikiLeaks released Vault 7, which detailed the CIA surveillance tools and really angered the CIA. According to a very thorough report in Yahoo News, the CIA under Pompeo plotted his kidnapping Assange and discussed assassinating Assange, killing a journalist for exposing something that they didn't like. And when Pompeo was asked about that, he didn't really deny it. He said that, whoever leaked that should be, should be arrested, or he said something ridiculous like that. So, it's no surprise that he doesn't really care about the Saudis killing Khashoggi, and the administration that he was a part of was incredibly supportive of the Saudis. All right, so the last news story here. This is from Kyle Anzalone over at the Libertarian Institute, and it's goodish news maybe. President Ariel Henry of Haiti, he's still looking for the UN to deploy military force as violence is escalating in the country. So there was some talk of the U.S. supporting a military intervention in Haiti, but the Associated Press reported that both Canada's another one that was kind of calling for it, and it was expected that the U.S. and Canada would lead this force if it would happen, or would be really pushing other countries to do it. But the Associated Press reported that both the U.S. and Canada expressed no interest in either country leading an armed mission in Haiti. U.S. Deputy Ambassador Robert Wood said that Haiti must address its continued insecurity challenges. Additionally, he argued that the international community needed to support its efforts. So, yeah, it looks like they're not going to be intervening in Haiti, which is good, because a lot of people in Haiti are against the idea of military intervention, even though the situation does seem pretty bad there. There's a lot of violence, gang violence, but there is also, this uprising against Henry, who is he was put in 2021 as an interim prime minister. I believe he's both prime minister and president after what's his name? Moise was assassinated in 2021. So he wasn't elected, and a lot of people want him out, and he wants, some military support, foreign intervention. But that's it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints. We have a lot of good stuff. One from Ted Galen Carpenter: NATO's phony, non-belligerent, and dangerous status regarding the Ukraine war. One from the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, a letter they wrote to President Biden: Leopards versus the Russian Bear. Medea Benjamin and Nicholas J.S. Davies: what can the U.S. bring to the peace table for Ukraine? One from Caitlin Johnstone over at her Substack: Chinese aggression sure looks an awful lot like U.S. aggression. And she quotes one of my articles talking about Kevin McCarthy's plans to visit Taiwan, another provocation aimed at China. So go check that out. And then our spotlight is Eli Clifton over at Responsible Statecraft. Foxes watching the hen house. DC insiders oversee Biden defense plans. Clifton's really good at tracking all the funding and stuff of think tanks, of where it comes from, which is very important work. But that is it for me for today. Again, go to antiwar.com/donate to help us wrap up this fundraiser. And again, like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. We're also on Odyssey and Rumble. If you want to listen to the audio version, you listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. You could leave reviews. Again, share the show, tell your friends, all that stuff. That's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.